we can think about the lecture in terms of the modalities that lecture actually has as an event, as a performance. So what kind of modes are there? So I would just try to map it. Okay, so here is a teacher, here is a learner or a student. So we have some sort of relationship going on here. Then there is some sort of talk going on. Usually in lectures, there is a lecture giving giving a speech to learners who often and most of the time act as audiences, as listeners. So learner could be also taken as a listener as well. So this is a kind of classical positioning. Then we have some knowledge artifact. That's why KA. And we can talk about digital content present here. So we're talking here about content, and we can talk about that later. I think there is an interesting distinction to be made between digital content and digital materiality as a physical object. And I will just show it here in a second. So, you know, we hear the screen here, and this is probably linked to some sort of display. Just like in the present situation, there are displays, and you have to manage, you know, these displays. And something is going on. There is language, image, there may be a diagram going on that display, a link to digital content. Then there is a different type of digital content among the students, such as this one that you can see here. And of course, there is also materiality of the environment. So the environmental characteristics, design, physical technologies, you know, the table, the positioning, design and architecture of the space, chairs, lighting, the distance between people, you know, comfort, discomfort, this kind of atmospheric and more emotive characters of this learning experience or performance, air quality, atmosphere, so they all come to play into the experience and performance of lecture. Moving on, then we can also talk about physical technology that, you know, you can see here. So I mentioned the digital content that, you know, students are interacting with, but there is also the notion of technology that is brought into the lecture space. Then, of course, you know, it may happen that students are talking, and hopefully that happens in seminars. That normally happens, but in lectures this may not be the case that often. And of course there are some thought processes going on. Maybe someone is also just feeling not that great on the day, and maybe people are thinking, you know, someone is hungry, someone is thinking about something that is really troubling them. So they're so condensed in this situation, condensed in this environment and the performance of lecture. And this and what we can talk about here is actually that learning happens here through something that we call relational meaning making. And we can talk about it later if you're interested, kind of relational semiosis, because that's what I'm working on at the moment. Kind of what does the relationality of higher education mean? And this relational meaning making is multimodal and socio-material. We can talk about relationality here, that everything that happens here, the meaning making, happens in relation to all these different modes. That's why it's multimodal, and that's why it's socio-material. It's material because a lot of modes are materialized here, and it's social because those modes, they have socio-cultural meanings and histories. Now, just a couple of words on multimodality. So multimodality focuses on different modes of communication, and you can see examples here: sound, pictures, gestures, etc. And they're seen as semiotic resources, and it's taken that they can be analyzed individually or in multimodal ensembles. So that's a combination of modes. The approaches, they have provided concepts and then methods and frameworks for the collection and analysis of different aspects, those multimodal aspects of interaction and different environments, such as the lecture. And this is the relationship across, and between modes that can be explored. And this is taken from the website called Mode by the UCL, where the work of one of the founders of multimodality, Gunter Kress, originated, and then Carrie Jewett, also based at UCL, carried on that work. Then speaking about socio-materiality, because you may wonder or ask, so what is the difference? Socio-materiality calls for a greater consideration of matter, things, environments, a kind of space, positioning, in order to understand that teaching, learning, acts are actually types of embodied and material performances. And Annika just referred to Goffman in the beginning, and I think Goffmanian idea of everyday performance and how we act through these different performances or ways of communication that are very performative is very salient here. The material and social actually interact, and they create socio-material assemblages. And these assemblages are units, and they make meanings through the interactions between their social and material kind of parts. But these parts are usually observed in socio-material view as inseparable, as entwined wholes. So terms such as imbrication, entanglements, this is assemblages. This is very, very common, and these are common words, common terms to hear in socio-materiality research and in these approaches. So it's this notion of things being inseparable, entangled. And for that reason, a lot of socio-material research and studies really adopt a kind of ethnographic approach, kind of thick description of events, thinking about what is happening across all these different, socio-material influences that actually cross boundaries. I think boundary crossing is very interesting, among and between different spaces, different forms of living or thinking. So I just wanted to specify a couple of things about socio-materiality, and the next one is what is material. So it's the everyday stuff of our lives that is organic or inorganic, technological and natural, bodies, settings, substances, devices. And social is our symbols and desires, the interactions that we do and communication. And these two are very, very much forming some sort of an event or assemblages that I mentioned above. And it is in the relations and entanglements between material and social forces that everyday practices, including practitioners' activities, decisions, and responsibilities, are produced. And this is the quote by Fanning, because Tara Fanning was, I think, the first person to situate socio-materiality in higher education research. So that's why I think it's important to refer to her work here. Okay, so you asked me for this research example. I had a little conversation or email exchange with Annika, and we understood or we agreed that the best example for today would be taken from this article that was recently published, and as I mentioned earlier, it was actually co-written and done in collaboration with one of my doctoral researchers, Biljana Popova. So I just want to acknowledge Biljana's work here, and her work is quite significant in terms of the analysis, but we did go through it together and did this kind of collaboration in terms of discussions and development of the whole work. But this is again some of the questions that we can talk about. So how we actually design and work together as, you know, researcher, supervisor, doctoral researcher, supervisor, working together. But for me, this was a great experience, and for Biljana as well. So far, I'm aware of that, what Biljana tells me. Anyway, here, I think one important term is the idea of interactions and performance through idioms. So we're talking about lecture, or I will be talking about lecture as multimodal and socio-material performance through body and think idiom. So what is body idiom? It does build on Goffman's work and includes both bodily appearance and personal acts, kind of dress, bearing, movement, position, etc., as you can see here, and other things, you know, such as waving, saluting, facial decoration, broad emotional expression. So it's almost like a repertoire of different expressive modes that account for body idiom. However, what is really important is that we're talking here about body as a carrier of ideological and sociocultural meanings, and that is very important. So building on Scollon's work on body idiom, in the case of lectures, I identified that this is actually how bodies and their characteristics mediate the meanings and ideologies of lecture, performance, and ritual. And then Biljana and I, you know, discussed what that means, you know, for lectures and how we analyze that. And we also then proposed another term that tackles things and the thing idiom, and decided that what that actually meant based on the data that we had in our analysis is the sense, kind of visible, audible, tactile characteristics and histories of things whose meanings are contextually, historically, and socioculturally situated and also conditioned. And these things are always imbued with history and with values. And of course, the same counts for bodies. And we will delve deeper into that in a moment. So what were our research questions in this work? We were interested in what kind of materiality ingredients is there in a sample of lectures that we took, and I would just describe the sample in a second. And what is it like? What are salient material elements present in all contexts? So what we were interested here is really to map those lectures in terms of their socio-material multimodal character. And we were not interested as much in doing an ethnographic study, and we could have done that, and this is an opportunity also to develop it further and do it more as an in-depth description of you know, particular videos. So we could have selected that. I think it's very important to stress that, because a lot of socio-material researchers apply that method, ethnographic and a thick descriptive presentation of data, where they actually refer to some ideas and conclusions that they come up with in relation to the literature. The second research question is, what kind of sociocultural meanings or ideologies are mediated by those lecture salient material elements? And you can see that I'm using socio-cultural and socio-material with a hyphen in the article, and you can use it, you know, without and with hyphen. But I think again, this distinction is not just accidental, because I personally think that we can observe material elements on their own and then think about how they bring about those socio-cultural, socio-material units, or how they become assemblages, when we start thinking about how they happen, what their histories are, what their meanings are. So that's just personally my own view. So I think you can do it in different ways, kind of this type of analysis. Okay, so what is the data? And you can see here that I found this video on University of Gothenburg's YouTube channel, and the data that we based our sample on is certainly not these videos, but I will tell you which kind of videos we dealt with. So we looked at and analyzed 10 uploaded videos and these were most viewed lectures, or the videos. I have to correct myself here. These videos were most viewed in the official website and YouTube channels of 10 so-called, again, top universities from 10 diverse global countries. And again, what's the definition of top? This is a tricky definition, and it's just following the World Higher Education or Times Higher Education, high ranking tables. It's not something that we might necessarily agree to, but this is something, again, to note, where we really based and how we developed our, data collection. And what is very interesting to note here is that there were more than 1 million views altogether of those 10 video lectures. And why I'm saying this, because we can also think about generalizability of data here. You can say, well, okay, you just picked 10 video lectures. Are they representative? Is this a good sample? But we can also think about how many times those lectures were viewed. And to us, this was really important. And why it was important? Because if they were viewed so many times, so they were like kind of top viewed lectures, that meant something. And what that meant was that they, for some reason, and we can't really exactly now know what the reason was, but they were viewed at such a high rate. So that was significant, because we can then consider the data in terms of not only the video itself, but as an assemblage of the video and the viewers. So I just want to explain, the sampling and the kind of significance of that sampling. And in a moment you will see, which countries I'm talking about, and some of you or all of you may have read the article. Okay, so what kind of lecture or video lecture are we talking about? That's another thing to explain. So here is Professor Shapiro's lecture taken from Yale's university website, and I would just make a disclaimer that this lecture was not a part of our sample, although you can see that it has 1,720,000 views here when I took the screenshot. So we focus on one type of lecture, and that lecture is called the so-called video lecture. And we base this selection on Crook and Schofield's typology of lectures, of video lectures. And this kind of video lecture is a live video recorded lecture. And we thought about it because we thought that if that lecture was uploaded to showcase how the university in question actually chose to promote a representative face-to-face lecture in their own context, then they were happy to show it to the public, and they really wanted to bring or put forward a particular idea of what our lectures are like, or this is really a decision that was made in order to publicly present these lectures. So that was interesting, because I think the key term here is representative lecture, and also that they were happy to show, so to promote what the representative lecture was. Okay, so how did we do the analysis? And that's what this is where I get to an inquiry graphics analysis that I developed and detailed in some of my work that I would not spend that much time talking about today, but I will explain the analysis in this case. It's important then to explain, first of all, what those inquiry graphics are. So they're graphics, and when I talk about graphics, and when I say graphics, what are graphics? So graphics is the term, taken from the Greek term graphikos, which actually relates to anything that leaves a trace on a surface. So we can talk about digital surface, we can talk about kind of paper surface, and these traces can be different things, images, pictures, photographic, tracing. These can be words. So in a way, it is quite a broad term, but I have done work here in relation mainly to images and to pictorial images, such as photographs or videos. So that is what I have kind of focused on, photographs and videos. Anyway, these graphics are brought in relationship with concepts in teaching, learning, or research. So they form this relationship. It's almost, we can say that an inquiry graphic is a multimodal or socio-material sign. It's a modality, kind of meaning-making modality that consists of a graphic and a kind of conceptual idea or conceptual goal, whether it's a kind of learning objective in teaching or research objective, kind of research goal. And then these things, these kind of parts are brought together, and we're interested in their relationship. And the whole idea, the whole approach is based on the triadic sign and the logic of semiosis that builds on Charles Sanders Peirce, one of the leading semioticians, and his school of semiotics was developed in America. And he had a very particular approach to semiotics, kind of philosophical, based on logic, and he also developed what we can call the school of pragmatism. So how does this work? Because Peirce's sign is triadic, I will just present these three different sides of the sign, that when we view a video, of course they come together, they are inseparable. So we can talk about the embodied sign, the representative, and you can see here that I made a typo. It's not sync, it's sign. So the embodied sign, and what that is this visible material elements in the video. And what we do in the analysis, we notice, we name, we list things that we see, individual elements, such as is there a blackboard? As you can see here, there is a person standing. We can say it's a man, but a lot of these things are very socioculturally conditioned, because socio-cultural conditioning is that what we see, we immediately make meaning, we immediately interpret it in some sort of way. So here in this part of analysis, we are really trying to observe, to pause as much as we can, although that's impossible, our kind of sociocultural judgment. So, what are we noticing? I'm noticing, of course, I'm noticing some forms, but what are these forms like, etc., etc. But, we name them. Okay, a blackboard, I know it's a blackboard, and this just naming has salient sociocultural weight to it. And it's important to then note the presence of things, or maybe absence of things, because if something is absent, that is quite important, and it can bring about important conclusions in the analysis. And we count things. If we have a sample of 10 videos, and then we have the same element or elements repeat in all 10 videos, this is telling us something. There is a pattern there. So we're searching for patterns. Then the next thing is researcher's interpretant. And I'm using here Persian terminology. So representative in my own translation for pictorial data is embodied sign. And I should stress that this is my interpretation of appropriating, Persis triadic sign to analytical purposes. So there is an inspiration, but Peirce did not originally mean to develop that for analysis. So that's important to mention. So that's what is kind of new development here. The interpretant or interpretation by some mind, and here are the minds of researchers, is focusing attention on describing actions here and materials that we see. So what are they like? What are their potential situated meanings? So we are thinking about describing them. Is something small, big? Is the person looking nervous to us? So in these interpretative descriptive moments, I think a lot of people would ask, well, okay, is this subjective description? Well, you try to check that, with the other researcher that you are kind of coding with for some sense of reliability. But everything, all data research, data analysis that we do is interpretative. We can't really escape that. Sometimes I'm asked, okay, so how do we escape the level of subjectivity, in these descriptions? But everything is subjective. You analyze an interview, and it is a subjective interpretation by the interviewer, and by the researcher, and you can only do your best to provide to provide your thematization, your thematic coding, or the way how you developed your interpretation. So moving on to the final element of this analysis is the object. So we're looking at the video, but this video, being an inquiry graphic in the context of research, is it has a particular purpose and a particular conceptual research character. So here, with regards to the object and the question of, so what does this video refer to, what it represents? To us, the researchers, is actually what, this concept, the embodied sign, relates to in our research. And how do we define that? Through our research question. So sociocultural meanings or ideologies, things and body idiom, think body idiom. This is what we are placing as the object of our interrogation. So once we do, the representative or the kind of naming and noticing, and then the description, then we turn to the object to think about how we then formulate that with regards to our key research goals or questions. So that is the description of it, and I'm just placing here a research question so that you can see how that how the analysis and the research questions are brought together, because I'm aware, Annika told me that there are PhD students in the audience, so I'm really mindful of talking about certain things that I'm aware that a lot of PhD students are thinking about. Okay, so I am using a particular method, or I'm using particular analysis, so how do the two relate? The coherence here is quite important. And you can see I'm just reminding you about research question 1 and then research question 2 that effectively served to inform the object of this kind of triadic analytical framework. So first of all, you focus more on pictorial and kind of visual details of the video, then description, and finally this kind of meta layer of meanings that is really linked to the research question and questions. So moving on to findings, here is there are a couple of tables in the article, but of course I'm not here to just parrot and reproduce every single thing from the article. So this table I thought was particularly relevant because first of all, it shows you the selection of countries and the selection of subject topics of those lectures. And I can just read them because this might be a small table. So it is India, Japan, Russia, Egypt, Palestine, Spain, USA, UK, Italy, Canada. Okay, and the aspect of the video kind of subject: quantum mechanics, computer sciences and mathematics, public administration, civil engineering, philosophy, geography, literature, quantum mechanics, calculus, and architecture. So we deliberately chose like kind of quite diverse countries and diverse subjects, and this was again conditioned by the views as well. So in some sort of way, it was a lucky coincidence that the most viewed lectures also provided some sort of variety of different subjects. And here, what you can see then in the table, but I should also explain because these are abbreviations. So we mapped here the occurrence here of material things that were salient in the videos we were viewing. So we're talking here about, okay, so is this space, what is it? Is it a lecture hall or it's maybe a little webinar seminar room? So that was, in all cases, this was a lecture hall. So quite a big, not massive space, but a big space. Then whether we're talking about some sort of a platform space where the teacher, the presenter, the lecturer is positioned on or within or situated there. So we're talking about the platform, but I think the meaning of platform needs to be just explained that it although there were all platforms, the space for the teacher can just be seen as a designated kind of space for an authority, kind of authoritative speaker. So it's just that space where the lecturer is positioned, where the lecturer has some freedom of movement. Then we're talking here about blackboards, so that's BB. And for us, this was very surprising to see that all those videos that were most viewed also had blackboards in the background. We were quite surprised by that. Then WB is whiteboard, microphone, projector, and then the use of some sort of slide technology, so PowerPoint or PTPP. You can also see here how many lectures use that. Then now within these slides, we even looked at how many times they use different modes of communication. So images, videos, or bullet points. Because I'm not sure, I'm sure you must have heard about the criticism, of the PowerPoint presentation by Tufte and his notion of kind of death by PowerPoint and bullet points and masses of words on the screen, etc. So for us, this was really interesting that not a single presentation used actually bullet points, whereas we are personally aware that at least in practices in the UK, in the context where I am positioned within, and Bilana is positioned in the context of Morocco and Moroccan higher education institution. So we both were aware that we were all using, all lectures were using bullet points. So for us, this was kind of really interesting. So was it actually that the people who were choosing these videos, so what is behind that? And of course, we don't have all the answers, but this is what we found in those most viewed videos. And you can see here, not very many images and video occurred only in the lecture in Japan, interestingly, and it was the lecture on computer sciences and mathematics. So you know, there were for us, I don't know for you, but quite a few surprises. Okay, so moving on from the data and the table that I showed, but there are more things, and I don't have time actually today to talk about all the details, although I'm happy to answer questions about any points in the article, if you have, you know, and any queries about it. But I would here focus on the salient body and think idiom, and what the salients mean. What is the salient body and thinking idiom? Is something that was repeated or was present in all 10 video lectures. And then we thought about it, because remember, our research question is, what are the ideological, the sociocultural meanings of these things? So we had a lot of time to talk about it. So we concluded that there is a particular positioning and hierarchy reproduced here in case of lecturing performance that brings together think and body, kind of platform, gaze, you know, assemblage, or think body idiom. So what is it? So the socio-material, and I'm literally quoting here from the article. So the socio-material platform gaze reproduces a hierarchical order between teachers and students, mediated by the architectural and design features of lecture environments. So we're talking here about unidirectional gaze, because if you're in the audiences and looking at one point in front of you, which is the teacher, or you have you know, something on the display, that's a unidirectional gaze. Just, but it meanders, it can meander from one point to the other. However, it's very important to state that this unidirectional gaze is very much changed today with mobile technologies, because now the students' attention is split between, I don't know, laptops, notes, mobile phones, and what is happening. So now this gaze is diversifying in a way, but the traditional gaze is this unidirectional gaze. And this gaze kind of disciplines and encultures the learners into the social order and hierarchy that they are to be members of. So there is some sort of hierarchy here. So higher education institutions are hierarchical institutions. Let's face it, there are some hierarchical orders. And of course, this differs from the context to context, you know, from context to context, it can be really, really highly different. So in some, let's say, you know, national or spaces and particular institutions, the hierarchies can be quite diffused, but in some not. But to what extent are they this diffused? And Skolon argues that crucial to system of discipline is actually the architecture of this hierarchical gaze, where you actually learn to follow those hierarchies, and they're in a way enculturating you in the system. Okay, so here we have the example of this platform and the kind of platform gaze mediation. And the next one is just an example of a different kind of space that we can say is just, you know, this is actually a lecturing authority space in relation to the gaze and that is directed towards the lecturer. However, I think what is really important here, because we don't want to say, okay, so, you know, this is a very ideological space. That's not the point. The point is that actually, even this kind of monofocal positioning in lecture environments does not necessarily mean that the hierarchy is strongly maintained or that lectures do not challenge it. So actually, the lectures have this agency to challenge it. It's upon the lecturer to challenge this hierarchy, this positioning, and it can be diffused. So I think this is very important to note. And moving on here, just a couple of points there, linked to this diffusion. So the lecture can acknowledge students' interpretative faculties, their interpretations of the ongoing speech and content. They can do that as a part of description, analysis, story, and they can link it to whatever they're talking about, the resource, image, text, video. So this is within their kind of communicative and performative repertoire. And this is something that I'm building on the previous research I did with a colleague at the University of Nottingham, where we looked at how lectures talk about the visual representations that they use in their lectures. And we really looked at diverse sample across universities in the UK. In that way, lectures can acknowledge students' meaning-making processes in situ as an exchange of ongoing meanings and the kind of shared experience that actually a lecture is, rather than a unidirectional dissemination of messages. And you see this also, even this particular situation of a webinar, for its part, when there is no invitation for comments, this can be also seen as some sort of unidirectional form of presentation. So that's why I'm really looking forward to the questions and our interactions, because that is the most important part for me about our communication. And this is taken from the work by Kress and Salander. Okay. Another thing that we noticed is normative bodies. And the picture you see here is taken from French noir films. And I'm getting closer to the end. Annika, am I doing fine with time? Just to check with you. Yeah? Yes? Because I just have a few more slides to finish.
Yeah, okay. Go on with those. And we postpone, we make it a bit longer. We changed the schedule a bit, but that's okay. Go on.
Thank you. Because you see that I lose a sense of time when I start talking about things. So here the point is, I will accelerate now, that 9 times out of 10, the focus is on male speaker. So out of 10 lectures, 9 lectures were men, what we perceived to be men. Of course, that's important to stress. And only 1 female lecture, so male versus kind of female in terms of numbers, 9 to 1. And why is this interesting? So the historical and cultural framing of females and their bodies, as kind of passive, beautifully decorated subjects of the gaze. Again, we're talking about gaze. We can say that it historical and culturally undermined the value of the female voice. And females are as vocalized, knowing and intellectual subjects for a very long time. I think there is an interesting experiment there where we can send maybe the same kind of intellectual text and with kind of male or female picture attached to it, and see how people respond to it. I'm not aware if that has been done. It would be interesting to know. But what women would have or want to say, or how they contributed to scientific or any other progress, historically would be rarely given public significance or attention unless they were ruling elites. And then, of course, in academic landscape, that change occurred only in the last 50 to 60 years. And of course, we didn't find any any representation of diverse identities as well in our sample. And I think that is also, and I chose the pictures just to illustrate the identity characteristics that we did not find in our sample. And the blackboard is a salient thing idiom. I think there's something very, very interesting there. But if you're interested in the kind of discussion around it and how it was brought into higher education spaces because of economical kind of efficiency reasons that we even today face in higher education, then I would just leave it there and have a couple of conclusions to share before I end. So lectures operate with a variety of material modes, and they imbue various meanings of the lecture. and they're routinely mediated by what we saw as normative bodies and things, and enabling and constraining affordances. So, you know, what things can afford and not in education context, represent and reinforcing specific social practices. And the presence of diverse digital technology, because we also focus on technology, but you know, there is only specific focus we can talk about today, is really marginal. And students' hands-on response, for example, by technology, absent, and to us that actually is this discrepancy between, you know, digital education reality and technology hype, and all these futuristic visions for higher education. And why is that important in this kind of post-digital society? Because we have accelerated technology, data-driven society, the blurring of boundaries between digital and real and everyday communication, and that constitutes the contemporary post-digital time. But it really remains to be seen how that you know, plays out for, or you know, develops for lectures, and how they become transformed and not just serving kind of economic and practical and efficient roles. And there is a need for purposefully considering of how materiality actually limits or enhances possibilities for learning, and critically deliberating how and why specific educational practices become stabilized, dominant, and powerful. So thank you so much for your time. And
thank you so much.